Little girl beaten into a coma by her gambling. Aunt, then a millionaire CEO, saw and did this with her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin. It was a cold winter night when Caleb Whitmore, a millionaire CEO, was driving home after a long day at work. The city lights reflected off his sleek black car as he weaved through the busy streets. His mind was preoccupied with the usual tasks, business meetings, contracts, numbers, but for some reason, tonight felt different. Something tugged at him, pulling his attention away from the road ahead. The city, bustling with energy and lights, seemed distant and far away. He found himself driving down a quieter street, away from the noise, when his headlights suddenly caught a small figure in the distance. His heart skipped a beat as he slowed down, squinting through the windshield. There, in the shadows, huddled under the dim light of a street lamp, was a little girl. She looked no older than 6 or 7, her clothes ragged and soaked by the falling snow. She was clutching something closely to her chest, her thin arms wrapped protectively around it. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Caleb's instincts told him something was wrong. His heart ached, but he couldn't move. The girl looked up, her gaze locking with his, and she whispered something barely audible. "Please, don't hurt us." Her voice cracked the air like fragile glass. It was a plea, but it was also a warning. Caleb's mind raced. What could have happened to her? What kind of world did she live in that made her so terrified? His hands tightened on the steering wheel, but he couldn't bring himself to drive away. He had seen his share of hardships in life, but this was different. He stopped the car, his heart pounding in his chest. Without thinking, he opened the door and stepped out into the cold. As he approached the girl, he saw her shiver uncontrollably, her small body barely able to hold up the weight of the baby she was clutching. The baby, too, looked sickly, wrapped in an old, tattered blanket. Caleb's chest tightened as he crouched down in front of her. He asked softly, "Are you all right? What happened?" She stared at him, her eyes filled with terror. She hurts us," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't take us back. I don't want to go back." Caleb's mind reeled as he pieced together the horror of the situation. He could feel the weight of the girl's words, the pain in her voice. Without thinking twice, he gently scooped her up into his arms, holding her close as the baby whimpered against his chest. He didn't know what he was doing, but he knew he couldn't leave her there. He promised her, "You're safe now. No one will hurt you again." He rushed to his car, not caring about the business meetings or the work waiting for him. His focus was entirely on the girl in his arms and the life she had been forced to endure. As he drove to the hospital, Caleb couldn't shake the image of the little girl's face, her words echoing in his mind. "She hurts us." Those words would haunt him, and he knew he couldn't ignore them. What he didn't know was that this encounter would change the course of his life forever. As Caleb Whitmore drove through the cold, dark streets towards the hospital, he couldn't shake the image of the little girl in his arms. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the world in white, but it did nothing to settle the storm churning inside him. He glanced at her again, her face pale, lips trembling, her eyes closed as if trying to block out the pain. The baby she had been clutching was still whimpering faintly, and Caleb could feel the tiny body shivering against him. He knew he needed to get them to safety, but something deeper was pulling at him, something he couldn't explain. Who would do this to a child? Who could hurt someone so small, so fragile? Caleb's mind drifted back to his own past. His success had come with sacrifice. He had built his empire alone, pushing away the people who cared about him. For years, he had buried his emotions, focusing only on business and wealth. But now, with this little girl in his arms, he was faced with a reality he had tried to ignore. He had spent so long in his ivory tower, surrounded by glass and steel, never questioning the world outside. But this was different. As he reached the hospital, he could feel his pulse quicken. The emergency room was busy, a blur of nurses, doctors, and flashing lights. Caleb walked through the doors, the girl still clutched tightly in his arms. A nurse glanced up, her eyes widening at the sight of him. She rushed over, her voice steady but urgent. "What happened?" she asked, already taking the girl from him. Caleb stood frozen, his hands still trembling. He had no answers, only the overwhelming sense that he had to help. "She was beaten," Caleb said quietly, his voice shaking. "She's in pain. I don't know who did this." The nurse nodded quickly, motioning for another nurse to assist her. They wheeled the girl away, but not before Caleb heard the softest whisper from the child's lips. "Mommy is really sick." The words hit Caleb like a punch to the stomach. His heart stopped for a moment. He couldn't understand why, but those words, those simple words, made everything feel personal. He stood there, motionless, as the nurse disappeared into the back of the hospital with the girl. Caleb's mind raced. What kind of life had this little girl lived? Why was she alone in the streets? And who was the mother she had mentioned? A million questions filled his head, but one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away from this. He couldn't go back to his empty office, to the cold, heartless world he had built. The guilt, the responsibility, he couldn't ignore it anymore. Caleb found himself at a crossroads, and he didn't know where it would lead. He walked slowly down the hallway, trying to shake the feeling of helplessness that had settled over him. He could feel the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. But there was something else now, something he couldn't ignore. It was the realization that he had been living in a bubble, a world of his own making, while real people, real lives, were out there suffering. The girl's words, "Mommy is really sick," haunted him. Who was she? What had happened to her mother? Why was she so afraid? Caleb had never been a man to show emotion. He had always been the one in control, the one making the decisions. But now, with this little girl, he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Empathy. The hospital was a maze of white walls and bright lights, but Caleb hardly noticed. His focus was entirely on the girl and what would happen to her next. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to make sure she was safe. The nurse who had taken the girl into the back appeared moments later, her expression grim. "She's stable for now," she said, glancing at Caleb. "But she's going to need a lot of care. She's been through a lot." Caleb nodded, barely hearing her words. He was already lost in thought, thinking of ways he could help. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice firm now, filled with determination. The nurse hesitated before speaking. "She'll need a foster home, and you'll need to contact Child Protective Services." Caleb felt his chest tighten. The thought of this little girl being placed into the system, into a world that had already failed her, was almost too much to bear. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about helping her tonight. It was about giving her a future, a chance at something better. He couldn't promise her the world, but he could promise her one thing: she wouldn't have to face it alone. Caleb took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling in. This would change everything. He had never expected his life to take this turn. But now, with this little girl, he realized that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could change the course of everything. The next morning, Caleb Whitmore sat in his sleek, high-rise office, staring out the window at the city below. The snow had stopped falling, but the weight of the previous night still hung over him. He couldn't shake the image of the little girl's face, her eyes filled with fear, the way her small body had shivered in his arms. It felt like a distant memory, yet it was still fresh, vivid, and impossible to ignore. He glanced at the clock on his desk. It was almost time for his next meeting. But Caleb didn't feel the usual urgency. His mind kept drifting back to the hospital, to the girl. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to care. In the past, he had made a career of pushing away personal connections, of burying his emotions beneath his wealth and success. But now, with the memory of that child still lingering in his mind, it was impossible to pretend that nothing had changed. The CEO who had once been so focused on his business empire, the man who had surrounded himself with luxury and control, now felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He ran his fingers through his hair and sighed. "What am I supposed to do now?" he muttered to himself. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered, holding a stack of papers. "Mr. Whitmore, your next meeting is scheduled in 10 minutes. The board is waiting for you." Caleb nodded absent-mindedly, barely hearing her. "Cancel it," he said, surprising himself with the command. His assistant looked taken aback, but nodded and left the room without questioning him. Caleb knew he needed to make a decision, and he couldn't do that by sitting here, distracted by the noise of business. His thoughts were elsewhere, and for once, he allowed himself to acknowledge it. The truth was, he couldn't forget about the girl. He didn't even know her name yet, but it felt like he already knew her story. She had been alone, abandoned, left to fend for herself on the streets. And yet, despite the fear in her eyes, she had trusted him. She had trusted him enough to ask him not to take her back to whatever life had been waiting for her. He had to do something. He had to help her. Caleb stood up from his desk and walked over to the window, looking out over the city once more. His life had been a series of calculated moves, each one leading him further away from the kind of person he used to be. But now, with this little girl, it felt like something had cracked open inside him, something that had been hidden for years. He had spent so long building his empire, so focused on success and power, that he had never stopped to think about what really mattered. He hadn't thought about the people who needed help, the ones who were struggling, the ones who were invisible to the world. And yet here she was, this little girl, standing in front of him in a way no one else had ever done. She had forced him to see what he had been ignoring all along. Caleb walked out of his office and made his way to the elevator. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to find her. He was going to make sure she was safe, that she had a chance at something better than the life she had been given. As he stepped into the elevator, he felt a strange sense of purpose. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel like he was running away from something. He felt like he was running towards something. He had no idea where this journey would lead, but he was ready to find out. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that if he didn't try, he would regret it forever. Caleb's mind raced as the elevator descended, his heart beating faster with every floor. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that one thing was certain. This wasn't just about a little girl. This was about him too, about facing the parts of himself that he had buried for so long. The elevator stopped on the ground floor, and Caleb walked out, his mind made up. He would find her. He would help her. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment that changed everything for him. Caleb Whitmore arrived at the hospital in a rush, his heart pounding in his chest. As he stepped out of the car, He felt the cold air bite at his face, but it was nothing compared to the emotional chill he felt inside. He couldn't get the image of that little girl out of his mind. The fear in her eyes, the trembling voice, the desperation. He had promised her she would be safe, but he didn't even know where to start. As he walked into the emergency room, the sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, and the hustle of doctors and nurses was like a distant hum to him. He had never felt so out of place in his own life. A nurse greeted him at the entrance. "Mr. Whitmore, right?" she asked, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and professionalism. "How is she?" Caleb's voice was strained, his anxiety evident. "She's stable for now," the nurse replied. "We've got her on IV fluids, and we're running some tests, but it's going to take time. She's been through a lot." Caleb nodded but didn't speak. He could hardly breathe, his mind racing. This little girl had been abandoned, beaten, and left to fend for herself. What kind of world had she been living in? "Can I see her?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." They walked down a long, sterile hallway, the quiet echo of their footsteps, the only sound in the otherwise busy hospital. As they approached the room, Caleb felt his chest tighten. He had no idea what to expect. Would she remember him? Would she be scared of him? He had only been a stranger who had picked her up from the cold street. Would she even trust him now? The nurse opened the door, and Caleb stepped inside. The little girl was lying in a hospital bed, her small frame almost swallowed by the large white sheets. She was still unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Her face was bruised, her lips cracked, and her skin had an ashen hue. Caleb's heart ached at the sight of her. How could anyone do this to a child? He slowly walked over to the side of the bed and stood there for a moment, just watching her. He felt a strange mix of guilt and determination wash over him. He had promised her that she was safe. But what did that even mean? Safe from the cold? From the pain? Or did it mean something more? The girl stirred slightly in her sleep, her small hand twitching, as if reaching for something. Caleb hesitated before gently taking her hand in his. It was cold, fragile. She didn't stir, but for a brief moment, it felt like she trusted him. "You're safe now," he whispered, though the words felt hollow. He knew he couldn't just leave her here. She needed more than just medical care. She needed a home, stability, love. But how could he offer that? His mind raced. He had never been a father. He had never even considered what it would be like to care for someone else in this way. But this little girl had cracked open something in him. Something he had buried so deep, he hadn't even realized it was there. He wasn't sure what he was doing or why he was doing it. But he knew one thing: he couldn't walk away from her now. Caleb stood there, holding her hand, silently vowing that he would protect her, that he would be there for her no matter what. His world had been about business, success, and power. But now, with this child, he realized that those things didn't matter. What mattered was making sure she didn't have to face this world alone. The door opened behind him, and the nurse returned with a clipboard in her hands. She gave him a sympathetic smile. "She's a fighter," the nurse said softly, "but she's going to need time. A lot of it. And help. We've contacted Child Protective Services, but..." The words hung in the air, unsaid but understood. The system was broken. It was hard enough for children to find safety in a world that was supposed to protect them. Caleb felt a surge of anger rise up inside him. This girl had been let down by everyone around her, by the people who were supposed to care for her, by the system that was supposed to protect her. And yet, here he was, a stranger, trying to make a difference. The nurse's voice broke through his thoughts. "We'll need your contact information, Mr. Whitmore." and I'll keep you updated on her progress. But it might take a while to find a permanent solution for her. Caleb looked down at the little girl's hand, still nestled in his own. He couldn't help but feel that this was his responsibility now. He had seen what she was capable of enduring, and he couldn't turn his back on her. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly, his voice steady. The nurse nodded. "We'll let you know if we need anything further. But for now, you should get some rest. It's going to be a long road ahead for all of us." Caleb stepped back from the bed, still holding the girl's hand for a moment longer before letting go. He wasn't sure how he was going to make it all work, but he knew he had to try. As he left the room, a new determination filled him. This was no longer just about helping a child in need. It was about giving her a chance at something better, and he would do whatever it took to make sure she had that chance. Caleb Whitmore spent the next few days in a haze, his mind consumed with thoughts of the little girl. He had always been a man of control, a man who thrived in the predictable, the safe. But now, as he sat in his office, staring at the pile of paperwork that had piled up in his absence, he realized that nothing felt right. The papers before him, the meetings, the deals, all of it seemed insignificant now. His thoughts kept returning to her, the child who had touched a part of him he thought was long buried. He had promised her safety, but that promise felt empty until he could make good on it. The days passed, and Caleb found himself visiting the hospital daily. Each time he walked through those sterile halls, it felt like he was stepping further into a world that had nothing to do with business, nothing to do with his carefully constructed life. He would sit by her bed, watching her sleep, feeling helpless, yet determined. The doctors assured him she was improving, but the emotional scars were not so easily healed. Her bruises were fading, but the fear in her eyes hadn't gone away. Caleb couldn't help but feel that he needed to do more. He couldn't just watch from the sidelines anymore. The girl needed more than just medical care. She needed stability, a home. He had no experience with children, but he knew what it felt like to be alone, to feel abandoned. He had spent years building his empire, pushing away the very thing he now realized he had been searching for all along: connection. Caleb's phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his lawyer, Mr. Whitmore. "I've been in touch with Child Protective Services. We have a few options, but we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more difficult it will be for her to adjust." Caleb's heart sank. He had known this day would come, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure he was ready. "What do we need to do?" he asked, his voice steady, despite the growing unease in his chest. "We can apply for temporary custody," the lawyer replied. "It's not a guarantee, but given your position and the circumstances, it's worth a shot. We'll need to present a case, and we'll need to act fast. The system moves slowly, and we can't afford to let her fall through the cracks." Caleb's mind raced. He didn't know the first thing about legal proceedings or child custody, but he knew he couldn't just let her be placed in another foster home. He couldn't let her go back to a system that had failed her once. "Let's do it," Caleb said, his voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." The lawyer confirmed the details, and Caleb hung up, his resolve strengthening. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, legal meetings, and phone calls. Caleb spent hours meeting with the necessary professionals, trying to understand the intricacies of the system he was now a part of. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of frustration. But each time he thought about the little girl, the desire to protect her pushed him forward. Caleb knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were legal battles to fight, obstacles to overcome, and doubts to face. But every time he thought about her, about the way she had looked at him with those big, fearful eyes, something inside him shifted. He couldn't back down now. The day of the hearing arrived. Caleb stood in front of the judge, a sense of nervous energy bubbling in his chest. He had never been in a courtroom before, and he wasn't sure what to expect. He had never imagined he'd be here, fighting for custody of a child he had only known for a few days. But here he was. The judge listened as Caleb's lawyer presented the case, outlining Caleb's background, his success, and his willingness to provide for the girl. Caleb didn't say much during the hearing. He didn't need to. The judge could see it in his eyes. This wasn't about a business deal. This was personal. The judge asked a few questions, most of which Caleb answered with honesty, explaining his feelings of responsibility for the girl and his desire to provide her with a safe, stable home. After a tense silence, the judge nodded. "I've reviewed the case, and based on the circumstances, I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. Whitmore." Caleb's heart soared. He had won. It wasn't permanent. Not yet. But it was a start. The judge's voice brought him back to the present. "Mr. Whitmore, you're now legally responsible for her care. I trust you'll do what's best for this child." Caleb nodded, barely able to hold back the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. He had done it. He had given her a chance. As he left the courthouse, Caleb's phone buzzed with messages. He didn't check them. His mind was focused on one thing: the little girl waiting for him at the hospital. He had made a promise to her, and he was going to keep it. Caleb knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He had something worth fighting for now, and he wasn't going to let her down. The weeks following Caleb's legal victory were a whirlwind. The little girl, who had been nothing more than a frightened child on the cold street corner just a short time ago, was now officially under his care. Caleb had thought that the hard part was over, but he quickly learned that winning temporary custody was just the beginning. The girl, whose name was Ava, was still adjusting to the reality of being in a new home. Caleb's home. It wasn't a smooth transition. Ava was quiet, withdrawn, and for the first few days, she hardly spoke at all. She would sit on the couch, staring out the window, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if expecting someone to come take her away. Caleb had never dealt with a child before. His life had been about power, business, and success worlds far removed from the delicate needs of a young girl trying to heal from trauma. But he was determined to make it work. Every evening, after his long, demanding workdays, he would sit with Ava, trying to engage her, to offer her a sense of safety and stability. He didn't know if she understood, but he hoped that somehow, through his actions, she would begin to feel a little more at home. Caleb had hired a therapist to help Ava deal with the trauma she had experienced, but progress was slow. Ava had been through so much. Too much for a child of her age. And Caleb knew it would take time to rebuild the trust she had lost in the world. One evening, as Caleb was preparing dinner, he heard Ava's voice coming from the living room. It was the first time she had spoken to him without him prompting her. "Do you think I'll ever see my mommy again?" Ava asked. Her voice small, almost a whisper. Caleb paused, the knife in his hand frozen in midair. He didn't know how to answer her. He had been given custody of Ava, but that didn't mean he had any real answers. He had no idea where her mother was, or what had happened to her. The only thing he knew for certain was that Ava had been abandoned, neglected, and left to survive on her own. Caleb walked into the living room, his heart heavy. "I don't know," he said gently, sitting down beside her. "But I'm here now, Ava, and I'll make sure nothing happens to you. You're safe with me." Ava looked at him with wide eyes, her small face filled with confusion and fear. "But what if I'm not enough?" she asked, her voice cracking. Caleb's heart broke. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew that he could never replace the family she had lost. But he could offer her something real. He reached out and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "You're more than enough, Ava. You don't have to worry about that. You're not alone anymore." Ava hesitated for a moment, then slowly leaned against him, the weight of her small body leaning into his side. Caleb wrapped his arm around her, holding her tightly. For the first time since she had come into his life, he felt like he was doing something right. In that moment, Caleb realized that this wasn't just about giving Ava a home. It was about showing her what it meant to have someone who truly cared. She wasn't just a child in need of a place to stay. She was a child in need of love, of stability, and of a future. And that was something Caleb was determined to give her. The days passed, and slowly, Ava began to show small signs of progress. She started talking more, playing with the toys Caleb had bought for her, and even laughing once in a while. But there were still moments when the pain of her past would resurface. She would have nightmares, waking up in a panic, crying for her mother, and Caleb would hold her close, reassuring her that she was safe. It wasn't easy. Some nights, Caleb lay awake in bed, wondering if he was doing enough. Was he making a difference in her life? Could he really be the father figure she needed? Even though he had no idea what it meant to be a father. But every time Ava smiled, every time she looked at him with trust in her eyes, Caleb knew that he was on the right path. He had promised her safety, and he was going to keep that promise, no matter what it took. One evening, as Caleb was tucking Ava into bed, she looked up at him with her big brown eyes and asked, "Can I stay here forever?" Caleb felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what the future held. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He was going to do everything in his power to give Ava the home she deserved. "Yes," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You can stay here forever." As the days turned into weeks, Caleb found himself adjusting to a new rhythm, a new purpose. Ava was no longer the quiet, withdrawn girl who had arrived at his doorstep. Slowly but surely, she was beginning to open up to him, to trust him in ways he hadn't expected. She still had her moments of fear, her lingering nightmares, and the silence that came when she would withdraw into herself. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. Caleb couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He was starting to see glimpses of the bright, curious child she had once been, the child who still had the capacity to smile, to laugh, and to hope. One afternoon, as Caleb was finishing up some work in his study, he heard Ava's voice coming from the living room. It was the sound of her humming a tune, the same tune she had begun to sing every morning as she got ready for school. Caleb couldn't help but smile. It was a simple thing, but to him, it was a sign that Ava was finding her place in the world again. He walked into the living room, where she was sitting on the couch with a sketchbook in her lap, a look of concentration on her face. "What are you drawing?" Caleb asked, crouching down beside her. Ava looked up, her eyes bright. "It's a picture of the house," she said, pointing to the drawing. "I want to draw a picture of where I live now." Caleb's heart swelled with emotion. She had always been so guarded, so unsure of her place in the world, and now she was starting to claim it. She was beginning to see herself as part of this home, this family. "I love it," Caleb said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." Ava smiled shyly, looking down at her drawing. Caleb reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You know, you don't have to keep it all inside," he said. "If you ever want to talk, or if you need anything, I'm always here." Ava looked up at him, her expression uncertain. After a moment of silence, she spoke. "Do you think I'll always be here? Like, do you think I'll always live with you?" Caleb felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't realized how much Ava was still carrying inside, how much she still worried about her place in the world. "Yes," he said firmly, his voice steady. "You'll always have a home here. You're part of this family now, Ava. I promise you that." She didn't respond at first, but as she looked at him, her eyes softened. A small, hesitant smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Caleb could see the fear beginning to fade, replaced by a glimmer of something else, hope. Over the next few weeks, Caleb and Ava began to build more routines together. They went to the park after school, went grocery shopping together, and spent weekends painting the guest room, preparing it for the possibility that Ava would one day want her own space. Caleb made sure to involve her in everything, letting her make decisions about the house, about their life. He wanted her to know that this wasn't just his life, his home. It was hers too. It wasn't always easy. There were still difficult moments, times when the past would resurface for Ava, when she would cry in the middle of the night, her nightmares too much for her to handle on her own. Caleb would hold her, reassure her, and remind her that she was safe, that she didn't have to face those fears alone anymore. But each time, he felt more certain that he was doing the right thing, that he was becoming the man Ava needed him to be. One evening, as they were sitting on the couch together, watching a movie, Ava turned to him with a serious look on her face. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb turned to her, giving her his full attention. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Ava hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Why are you doing all of this? Why are you helping me?" Caleb felt his heart tighten in his chest. It wasn't a question he had expected, but it was a question he had been asking himself too. Why was he doing this? Why had he opened his life up to someone who wasn't even his child? The answer was simple, though he hadn't fully understood it until now. "Because I promised you that you were safe," Caleb said softly, his voice steady. "And because, in a way, you've saved me too." Ava looked at him, her eyes wide, as if trying to understand what he meant. Caleb smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "When I found you, I wasn't just saving you. I was finding a part of myself that I had lost a long time ago. You've helped me more than you know, Ava." Ava's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb saw the spark of something else in her eyes, a feeling that had been buried beneath all the pain. It was hope. It was trust. And Caleb knew, in that moment, that they were both on a journey of healing. They had found each other, and together, they would rebuild their lives, piece by piece, until they were whole again. Caleb's life had begun to shift in ways he never anticipated. His routine had changed, his priorities had evolved, and his perspective on the world was no longer dominated by meetings and boardrooms. Ava, the little girl he had once found trembling in his arms, was now his world. It had been several months since the day he had promised her safety, and though they were still navigating the difficulties of the past, the bond between them had grown stronger. Ava was no longer the silent, fearful child she had been when she first arrived at Caleb's home. She was talking more, playing with the toys he had bought for her, and even helping around the house. It was small progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Caleb found joy in the little moments, the way Ava smiled when she found a new toy she liked, or the way she asked to help him with dinner. It was in these moments that Caleb realized the impact of his decision. Not only had he given Ava a new life, he had once lived for success, for power, and for control. But now he was living for something more, something real. One afternoon, Caleb sat in the living room, watching Ava as she worked on her homework. It had been a quiet day, and Caleb took this rare moment to reflect. He thought back to the man he had been, the man who had been so focused on his empire that he had never allowed himself to experience the warmth of family. But now, everything felt different. He had found something he had never expected to find meaning. And it had come through Ava. He looked at her, her brow furrowed in concentration as she wrote in her notebook. The simple act of watching her brought a feeling of peace. She was his family now. There was no longer any question in his mind. He would do whatever it took to make sure she was happy, safe, and loved. As Caleb sat there, the weight of his promise to Ava settled over him once more. He had vowed that she would never have to go back to the life she had before, and he intended to keep that promise, no matter what. Ava had faced more hardship than any child should have to endure, and now it was Caleb's job to help her heal. Over the next few days, Ava began to open up in ways she hadn't before. She started to share stories about her life before she had come to Caleb's home, stories of her mother, her aunt, and the difficult life she had endured. Caleb listened patiently, offering her reassurance when she needed it. He had never realized how much she had been holding inside until now. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Ava turned to Caleb with a hesitant look in her eyes. Do you think I'll ever see my mom again?" she asked softly, her voice laced with sadness. Caleb's heart broke at the question. He had been avoiding this topic, unsure of how to answer her. He had no idea where her mother was, or even if she was still alive. But he knew one thing: Ava needed closure. "I don't know, sweetheart," Caleb said, his voice gentle. "But I do know that you have a family now. You have me, and you'll never be alone again." Ava's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, as if trying to understand the truth behind his words. Caleb reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know, it's hard," he said, "but no matter what, you'll always have a place here. I'm here for you, Ava, and I always will be." For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence, just holding hands. Caleb didn't know what the future held for Ava, but he knew that he would face it with her. Together, they would navigate the challenges ahead, and together, they would heal. The weeks continued to pass, and Ava began to thrive in ways Caleb hadn't expected. She started to smile more, laugh more, and even talk about her hopes for the future. It was small steps, but every little change felt like a victory. One night, as they sat down for dinner, Ava looked up at Caleb with a serious expression on her face. "Do you think I could go to college one day?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. Caleb was taken aback by the question. He had never really thought about the future in terms of Ava's dreams. "Of course, you can," he said, without hesitation. "You can be anything you want to be, Ava. You have all the potential in the world." Ava smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Caleb saw the spark of ambition in her eyes. In that moment, he realized something profound. Ava wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. And Caleb knew that, no matter what, he would be there to support her every step of the way. Together, they had come so far. And together, they would continue to grow. Caleb had learned more from Ava than he could ever have imagined. She had taught him the true meaning of love, of sacrifice, and of the power of second chances. And as they sat together, side by side, Caleb knew that this was just the beginning of their journey, one that would last a lifetime. A few months had passed since Caleb took Ava into his home, and with each passing day, he could see the transformation happening before his eyes. What had started as a desperate act of kindness had blossomed into something beautiful, something real. Ava was no longer the frightened, withdrawn girl who had once trembled in his arms. She was becoming a confident, curious child, laughing, playing, and exploring the world around her. The scars of her past were still there, hidden beneath the surface. But Caleb could see that she was starting to heal. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb took Ava to the park. It was a beautiful, sunny day, and the park was filled with children playing, families walking their dogs, and the sound of laughter in the air. As they walked along the path, Ava skipped ahead, her pigtails bouncing as she ran towards the swings. Caleb couldn't help but smile. He had never imagined that something as simple as a trip to the park would feel so profound. He watched her swing higher and higher, her face alight with joy. And for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of how far they had come. When they were done at the park, they sat on a bench, sharing a bag of pretzels. Caleb glanced over at Ava, watching her as she happily munched on a snack. He was about to say something when Ava suddenly turned to him with a serious expression. "Caleb," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty. What if I'm not good enough?" Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He had never heard her speak like this before, and the vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. He knew that despite all the progress they had made, there were still lingering doubts, lingering fears. He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers, squeezing it softly. "Ava," he said, his voice steady, "you are more than enough. You've always been enough, and you don't have to worry about being anything more than who you are." Ava looked at him, her wide brown eyes filled with confusion. "But I'm not perfect," she whispered. Caleb felt a pang of sadness for her. He knew she was struggling to understand what her place in the world was, what her future could be after everything she had been through. "Ava, no one is perfect. Not me. Not anyone. But the most important thing is that you try your best, that you keep moving forward, and you don't have to do it alone anymore. You have me, and you always will." Ava stayed quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the ground. Caleb could tell she was thinking deeply about his words. He waited, giving her the space she needed to process everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked up at him and smiled. "Thanks, Caleb," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "You don't ever need to thank me, Ava. I'm just glad you're here." The rest of the afternoon passed in a quiet contentment. They walked back home, side by side, and Caleb realized something. In this journey of helping Ava, he had found himself too. He had found a purpose beyond business, beyond success. He had found a family. And, for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. But just as Caleb thought things might be starting to settle, a new challenge appeared. A few days later, Caleb received a phone call that he had been dreading. It was from the social worker handling Ava's case. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm afraid there's been a development. We've received a report that Ava's biological mother has been found." Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "It means that there's a possibility that she might want to claim Ava, or at least attempt to get custody. We don't know yet, but it's something we need to prepare for." Caleb's world seemed to freeze. He had promised Ava that she would never have to go back to the life she had, that she would always be safe with him. And now, it seemed like that promise was in jeopardy. "What do I need to do?" Caleb asked, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "We need to see if we can prove that Ava is better off here with you," the social worker replied. "We'll have to go through a court process, and it may take some time, but I'll be in touch with you about the next steps." Caleb hung up the phone, feeling a wave of uncertainty wash over him. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't lose Ava. He had fought so hard to give her a better life, to give her a chance at happiness. And now, he would fight again. But this time, it would be different. This time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for her. Caleb stood up and walked over to where Ava was sitting, watching TV. She looked up at him, and for a moment, he could see the glimmer of hope in her eyes. He knew he couldn't let her down. He couldn't let anyone take her away from him. "Ava," Caleb said softly, sitting down next to her. "There's something we need to talk about." The days following Caleb's conversation with the social worker were filled with tension and uncertainty. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, and that he would have to fight for Ava in ways he hadn't anticipated. The possibility of her biological mother returning to claim her brought an entirely new set of challenges. Caleb had made promises to Ava, promises he wasn't ready to break. As he sat in his office late one evening, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders. His mind raced with worries about the court case, the legal battles, and the impact all of this might have on Ava. He didn't want her to be hurt again. He didn't want her to feel abandoned. But as much as he tried to focus on his work, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. How would she take the news? How could he protect her from the pain that was surely coming? The next morning, as Caleb made his way into the kitchen, he found Ava sitting at the table, drawing in her sketchbook. She was quiet, her brow furrowed in concentration. Caleb walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Hey, kiddo," he said gently, trying to sound as calm as possible. "We need to talk about something important." Ava put her pencil down, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice small. Caleb took a deep breath. He had rehearsed what he was going to say, but now that the moment had arrived, he found it difficult to put the words together. "There's something you need to know. Your mom. Well, we've been contacted by the people who are helping us with your case. It looks like your biological mom has been found, and there's a chance she might want to try to get custody of you." Ava blinked, confusion flickering in her eyes. "My mom? Is she coming back?" Caleb's heart broke at the look of hope in her face. "I don't know, Ava. I don't know if she's coming back, and I don't know what she wants. But what I do know is that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm not going to let anyone take you away from me." Ava was silent for a long moment, her small hands tightly clutching the edge of the table. Caleb could see the wheels turning in her mind. The uncertainty, the fear. He reached out and gently lifted her chin so that she was looking him in the eye. "Ava, I want you to understand something," Caleb said softly. "No matter what happens, you are my family. You're safe with me. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're okay." Ava nodded slowly, but Caleb could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. "What if she wants to take me away?" she whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand, trying to offer reassurance. "We don't know that for sure," he said. "But even if she does, we will go through this together. We'll fight for you, and we'll make sure you're where you're meant to be. And where you're meant to be is with me." Ava didn't respond, but Caleb could see that her walls were beginning to break down. She was scared, and he didn't blame her. She had already been through so much. And now, the uncertainty of her future loomed over her like a dark cloud. Caleb could feel his own anxiety building, but he refused to let Ava see his fear. He had to stay strong for her. He had to show her that no matter what, she wasn't alone. Over the next few days, Caleb worked closely with his lawyer to prepare for the upcoming court hearings. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was determined to do everything he could to keep Ava in his life. He started gathering evidence to prove that he could provide a stable, loving home for her. He spent hours organizing documents, making phone calls, and putting together a case that would show the judge that Ava deserved to stay with him. Caleb also made sure that Ava felt supported throughout the process. He talked to her about the court hearings, explaining that it might take some time, but that they would be together through it all. He promised her that no matter what happened, she wouldn't have to face the battle alone. As the court date drew closer, Caleb found himself growing more anxious. The thought of losing Ava, of her being taken away from him, was unbearable. But he kept reminding himself of the most important truth. He was her father now, and he would fight for her with everything he had. The day of the hearing arrived, and Caleb stood in the courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been in a situation like this before, and the weight of the moment felt overwhelming. But as he looked at Ava sitting beside him, her hand clasped in his, he knew that this was the right fight. He had already won in so many ways. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Caleb's lawyer spoke first, outlining the case and making a strong argument for why Ava should remain with him. Caleb sat quietly, his nerves a tight knot in his stomach, but he remained focused on the girl sitting beside him. Ava was his family. No one was going to take her away. When it was his turn to speak, Caleb stood up, his voice firm but calm. He talked about the love he had for Ava, about the bond they had built, and about how far they had come together. He spoke from the heart, not from a script, because he knew this was the most important thing he had ever said. The judge listened intently, and after a long pause, the decision was made. Caleb had won. Ava would stay with him. The relief that washed over him was overwhelming. He looked at Ava, who had been watching him with wide eyes, and smiled. "You're staying with me," he said softly. Ava smiled back, her face lighting up with joy. "I knew you wouldn't let me go," she whispered. Caleb pulled her into a tight hug, holding her close as he whispered, "I'll never let you go, Ava. You're my daughter now, and that's forever." The months after the court ruling passed quickly, each day blending into the next. Caleb and Ava settled into a new rhythm, one that felt more like a real family than ever before. The house, once so quiet and empty, was now full of life. Laughter echoed through the halls as Ava's sense of security grew, and Caleb found himself feeling more complete than he ever had before. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, a new challenge appeared on the horizon. Caleb had received another call this time, from Ava's biological mother. It was a shock to hear her voice, a voice he had never expected to encounter again. She claimed that she wanted to reconnect with Ava, that she had gotten clean and wanted to be a part of her life. Caleb felt his stomach twist with the news. He had worked so hard to make Ava feel safe, to give her a future, and now it seemed that all of that might be in jeopardy. Ava had been through so much already, and the last thing she needed was to be caught between the two worlds of uncertainty once more. But Caleb also knew he couldn't make this decision alone. It wasn't just about what was best for him, but what was best for Ava. That evening, after dinner, Caleb sat down with her on the couch, the air between them thick with unspoken questions. Ava, as usual, was absorbed in a book, but Caleb could see the worry in her eyes. He had tried to shield her from the news, but it was impossible to keep something like this from her. He gently set his hand on hers. "Ava, there's something we need to talk about," he began. Ava closed the book and turned to face him. Her expression was open, expectant, but there was a quiet sadness in her gaze. "What's wrong, Caleb?" she asked, her voice soft. Caleb hesitated. How could he even begin to explain everything that had happened? "I got a call today," he said, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of the moment. "It's about your mom." Ava's eyes widened, and she immediately looked down, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Caleb gently cupped her chin, lifting her face so that their eyes met. Ava, she wants to reconnect with you, he said carefully. She says she's been clean and wants to be a part of your life. There was a long, heavy silence. Ava's lips trembled slightly, and Caleb could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty. It was clear that she didn't know what to make of this. After everything she had been through, the idea of her biological mother returning was a painful reminder of the life she had tried to leave behind. I don't know what to do, Caleb admitted, his voice soft. I want to protect you, to keep you safe. But this is something you'll have to decide too. What do you want? Ava didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands, as if searching for something, some answer hidden beneath the surface. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready to see her again, Ava said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't want to go through all of that again. Caleb's heart clenched. He could feel the pain in her words, the fear of being hurt again, of being left behind once more. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Caleb reassured her, pulling her close. I'm here. No matter what. You don't have to face this alone. You take your time, and when you're ready, we'll figure it out together. Ava nodded, her small shoulders trembling as she rested her head against his chest. Caleb held her tightly, vowing to never let her go, to always be there for her, no matter what the future held. Over the next few weeks, the uncertainty hung over them like a cloud. Caleb continued to support Ava in every way he knew how, offering her comfort and reassurance when the anxiety of the situation grew too much to bear. But deep down, Caleb knew that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shield Ava from the decisions that lay ahead. This was her journey, her story to write, and he was simply there to guide her through it. He never expected to be in this position, fighting for custody of a child, trying to navigate the complexities of parenting when he had no experience. But he had learned something along the way. Love wasn't about having all the answers. It was about showing up, about being there when it counted. And Caleb had shown up. He had kept his promises to Ava, and he would continue to do so for as long as she needed him. One evening, Caleb took Ava to the park, just the two of them. It had been a while since they had done something simple like that, just walking, talking, no distractions. They sat on a bench, watching the sunset together. Ava looked at him with a thoughtful expression. Do you think I can forgive her? She asked, her voice uncertain. Caleb's heart softened at her question. It wasn't something he could answer for her, but he could guide her. That's something only you can decide, Ava, Caleb said gently. Forgiveness isn't something you have to rush into. Take your time, and when you're ready, you'll know what's best for you. Ava nodded, the weight of the world still heavy in her young eyes. But Caleb could see something else there too, hope. The smallest flicker of it. And in that moment, he realized that no matter what happened next, they were both going to be okay. Together. The days leading up to the next court hearing felt like an eternity. Caleb and Ava both knew that this was the final step one that would determine whether or not Caleb would officially become her permanent guardian. Ava had been through so much, and Caleb couldn't help but wonder if the weight of everything was starting to get to her. The uncertainty of her future loomed over them both, but Caleb kept reassuring her, promising that they would face whatever came together. The emotional strain was starting to show, though. Ava had become more withdrawn again, her usual bright energy dimming whenever the topic of her mother was brought up. Caleb knew it wasn't just the legal battle weighing on her, it was the fear of possibly having to face the woman who had abandoned her. One evening, Caleb sat down next to Ava on the couch, watching her as she quietly colored in her sketchbook. The television was on in the background, but neither of them was really paying attention to it. Caleb had been keeping a close eye on her, noticing that she'd been quieter than usual. "Ava," Caleb said gently, trying to get her attention. "Is everything okay?" Ava looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. But she didn't say anything. She just shrugged and turned her gaze back to her drawing. Caleb could tell that something was weighing on her, but he wasn't sure how to get her to open up. He tried again. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Ava's eyes flickered up to meet his. And for a moment, Caleb could see the conflict in her gaze. She wanted to say something, but the words seemed to be stuck in her throat. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of silence, Ava whispered, "What if I'm not strong enough?" Caleb's heart ached as he looked at her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the fear that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't worthy of the love and safety Caleb was offering her. It broke his heart, knowing how much she had suffered before coming into his life. "Ava," Caleb said softly, moving closer to her and placing a hand on hers. "You are stronger than you think. I know you've been through things that no child should ever have to go through. But you're here now, and you're not alone anymore. I'm not going anywhere, and I'll always be here for you." Ava's lip quivered, and Caleb could see her holding back tears. "But what if I'm still broken? What if I can't ever be normal again?" The words hit Caleb harder than he expected. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. Ava wasn't broken. She was a survivor. "You're not broken, Ava. You've been through a lot. But that doesn't mean you're any less than anyone else. You're strong, and you're brave. I'm proud of you every single day for how far you've come." Ava looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all Caleb could offer her was the truth. The truth that she was loved, that she mattered, and that nothing could ever take that away from her. She leaned into him then, and Caleb wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. For a moment, they just sat there, holding each other in silence. Caleb felt like he could protect her from anything, that no matter what happened in the future, he would always be there to stand by her side. After a while, Ava pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I want to be strong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to be able to handle this, to be okay. But it's hard." Caleb nodded, understanding her completely. It wasn't easy. Healing wasn't easy, but it was possible. "I know, sweetheart," he said gently, "but you don't have to do it alone. You have me, and we'll get through this together. No matter what happens, you're going to be okay." The next morning, as the day of the hearing approached, Caleb felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had done everything he could to prepare, and now it was up to the court to decide. But no matter what the decision would be, he knew one thing. He had already won. Ava was home. She was loved. And that was enough. As Caleb drove Ava to school that morning, he noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor. She was sitting up straighter, her eyes no longer filled with the same fear and doubt that had clouded them before. She looked at him with a small, hesitant smile. "Caleb?" she asked softly. "Do you think I'll ever be okay? Like, really okay?" Caleb smiled, his heart swelling with love for her. "You already are, Ava," he said, his voice steady. "You're already more than okay. You're perfect, just the way you are. And we'll keep working through this together, every step of the way." Ava didn't say anything more, but Caleb could see the hope in her eyes, the same hope that had been buried deep inside her for so long. As they pulled up to the school, Ava turned to him, her smile a little brighter. "Thanks, Caleb," she said quietly. "I think I'm ready." Caleb watched her walk toward the school doors, his heart filled with pride. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that whatever it was, they would face it together, and that was all that mattered. The day of the final court hearing had arrived. Caleb's heart was heavy as he sat in the waiting room, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the armrest of the chair. He glanced at Ava, who sat quietly beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. For the past few months, their life had been a whirlwind filled with the ups and downs of legal battles, uncertainties, and constant changes. Yet, through it all, one thing remained constant: their bond. Caleb had never expected to be in this position, fighting for custody of a child he had only recently met. But somehow, everything had led him here. Ava was his daughter in every sense of the word, and he would fight for her with everything he had. The courtroom door opened, and Caleb stood up, offering his hand to Ava. She took it hesitantly, but with a small nod of reassurance, she squeezed it, as if silently telling him that she trusted him. They walked into the courtroom together, and as they stood before the judge, Caleb could feel the weight of the moment. Ava, who had been so quiet for so long, was now standing beside him, her face calm but full of unspoken emotions. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The proceedings began, and Caleb could barely focus on the lawyer's words. His mind kept drifting to the little girl standing next to him, to the life they had built together. This was more than just a legal battle. It was about their future, their family. The judge listened carefully, and Caleb's lawyer presented a strong case for why Ava should stay with him. Caleb had provided everything Ava needed: stability, love, and a safe home. But it wasn't just the lawyer's arguments that mattered. Caleb knew that it was the love he had for Ava that would speak the loudest. He had been there for her when she had no one else, and he would continue to be there, no matter what. The judge then turned to Ava. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, but filled with quiet strength. "Ava," the judge said kindly, "how do you feel about staying with Mr. Whitmore?" Ava's voice was small but steady as she answered, "I want to stay with Caleb. I feel safe with him. He's my family." The words were simple, but they were everything. Caleb's heart swelled with emotion. Hearing Ava say that, hearing her claim him as her family, was all he needed to know that he had done the right thing. The judge paused for a moment, considering the weight of her words. After what felt like an eternity, the judge nodded. "I believe that it is in Ava's best interest to remain with Mr. Whitmore," the judge said. "This court hereby grants full custody of Ava to Mr. Whitmore." The words felt surreal to Caleb. He had won. Ava was staying with him, permanently. He looked down at Ava, who was now smiling up at him, her eyes shining with happiness. She reached up and took his hand, and for the first time in a long time, Caleb felt a deep sense of peace. He had given her the life she deserved, and now she was his, in every way. After the hearing, they walked out of the courtroom together, hand in hand. Caleb felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but he knew the real work was just beginning. Ava had a long road ahead of her, and so did he. There would be more challenges, more moments of uncertainty, but Caleb was ready. He had learned so much about himself through this journey, and about the power of love, of family, and of second chances. As they walked down the courthouse steps, Caleb looked over at Ava and smiled. "We did it," he said softly. Ava's face lit up, with a smile of her own. "We really did." Caleb's heart swelled with pride. They had made it through the hardest part, and now they could finally begin their new life, free from the fear of what might come. They had found each other, and that was all that mattered. Ava had a future filled with possibilities, and Caleb would be there, every step of the way, supporting her, guiding her, and loving her. They were no longer just a man and a girl thrown together by chance. They were family, bound by love and the promise of a better tomorrow. As they walked off into the sunlight, Caleb knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The journey was far from over, but with Ava by his side, he was ready for anything.